You've dealt with and you talk to all these manufacturers in China all the time. I mean, how are they looking at these tariffs right now from the U.S.?
Honestly, they're looking at it as more, this is a U.S. problem and not a China problem. When you actually look at the breakdown of the tariffs, there really are no EVs in the U.S., so it doesn't matter. Battery parts, well, or battery components, they are coming in, but again, it's slow. So is it really affecting the industry? No. PPE, for example, very small on the margin. So when you actually look at the overall hit to U.S. imports of Chinese goods, it's about $18 billion, give or take, and which is really only about 3 or 4% overall.
What do you suspect any potential response would be from the Chinese side? If, in fact, China sees this as a U.S. problem, then maybe they don't need to respond.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. There's a lot of expectation that the Chinese won't respond in force, but they may try to make a point. So, for example, there could be further restrictions on materials for batteries, germanium, that kind of thing. Secondly, though, U.S. exports of auto to China in 2023 was $6.2 billion. So you could see the Chinese retaliate and say, we're already at overcapacity with EVs or other cars. Let's just go ahead and not have these high-end automotive, which again would hit back and make a point at least to the U.S.
Hey, Cam, you mentioned about the tariffs up to 100% on EVs, and that was sort of a moot point at this point in the evolution of EVs because the United States doesn't really import Chinese EVs at this point, and 100% tariffs doesn't help that matter. But on PPE, for one, you have some there with you, just as sort of a bit of a prop, the masks and some of the surgical gloves, as well as syringes is part of this. But you are also arguing that, is this more symbolic because the Chinese have such scale in these areas, their price, okay, 25% tariff, even 50% tariff, is still cheaper than the raw material costs and the input costs of an American factory building the same thing. So it's not going to impact them at all, really.
That's right. I mean, when you look at masks into the U.S., the U.S. imports or Chinese imports of masks are 68% of the overall total. So if you look at this mask here, this is a 3M mask. We all remember these, the N95s during the pandemic. You can buy a 2-pack of these at Walmart for $3.60. In China, a production of a similar mask is anywhere between 30 to 40 cents. So when you look at 25% tariffs are now added, okay, now it's 38 cents, 50 cents. Is that going to impact overall? Are companies going to move supply chains? The answer is no. What's going to happen is to keep that margin likely, and because of inflation in the U.S., retailers will just simply raise their prices. And if they have to eat a small margin, then they will. But again, to your point, the scale, when you look at syringes, medical syringes, every day in the United States, there's 10 million medical syringes used. Okay. In China, to produce a real at-scale medical syringe is anywhere between 2 to 3 cents. Okay, you put a 50% tariff on it. Great. Well, again, now it's 3 cents or whatever, 4 cents, whatever. It doesn't matter at scale because, again, when you buy those in bulk, it's cheap. Those on sale in the U.S. range anywhere between 15 cents on up. So, again, is a manufacturer going to take that in China? No. What they're going to say to the U.S. buyer is, this is your problem. Maybe we'll cut you a deal down the line to kind of even things out, but we're not going to deal with this.
So you're saying this is really just going to hurt the U.S., that these tariffs are going to backfire and maybe be inflationary, too?
To some degree, but again, it's only $18 billion, which is 4%. So are there really EVs in Chinese EVs in the U.S.? No. PPE, maybe companies will start purchasing it from other places. We've seen that with these nice fancy gloves. So the same thing, you can buy this. These are about 7 to 10 cents each. Here in China, they're produced for about a penny, but only about 10 to 15% of gloves go from China into the U.S. It's actually more from Malaysia. So again, are you making an impact? Can there be some substitution? Perhaps, but overall, this is very much symbolic, and it's not going to affect the overall supply chain.
I'll borrow those gloves. I have a Michael Jackson costume party to go to this weekend, just as a cheaper option. Banter aside, Cameron, talk to us about what you're seeing as far as the economy is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lack of confidence overall, both in the private sector and consumers. So we've seen kind of the traditional wealth creation engines, rising real estate prices, changing your job, salary increases. Those have slowed down. There's an unclear roadmap for growth, right? We knew, for example, if you were Starbucks, one of the interesting things being in Shanghai is that it is the fiercest coffee market on the planet. So every other week there's a new coffee brand, a new taste, a new flavor, a new this, a new that. And so when you're Starbucks, when you're Peet's Coffee, your traditional growth model was, we can open up a new store, down the road, and we'll generate revenue that way. We can institute a new create a new product. That was fine up until about 18 months ago. And now the whole market market has shifted. And so the new forms of growth, we don't quite know where they're at. Other things such as this is the toughest job market for anybody, including graduates, in over a generation. So what we're seeing with graduates, a lot of them are deciding to go to a graduate school, and maybe if they even already have a master's, to go for a second master's to kind of put that off so they can continue to build their skill set.
One thing that stood out to me in kind of the pre-interview with you is the fact that if you're a manufacturer in China and you're not in the productive or strategic productive forces, or whatever you want to call it, in the new three of Xi Jinping, you're probably running a factory just to keep it running so you don't lose employees and the factory does not go derelict, right, during this slowdown. So is this just a product of top-down directives from the government saying, these industries you're going to make money, these ones you're going to have to take it for the team?
I don't necessarily think that they think you take it for the team. I think it's definitely clear where the new avenues of growth in the country are, right? But again, there's nothing wrong with exports. There's nothing wrong with making masks or PPE or other tools at Home Depot. And so those are still ongoing. But the challenge is both with the slump in North America and Europe, as well as here, the shift between, we knew what the growth drivers were: infrastructure, real estate, retail to some degree. So when you're producing steel in your steel mill, and historically you would just give it to real estate developers and contractors, now what do you do with it, right? So there is this rebalancing going on, and we don't quite know the roadmap where that's going to go.
You mentioned how tough this job market is. Obviously, we deal with this youth unemployment that's still quite high. How difficult is it to fill some of these positions in the labor market now?
Oh, well, there's plenty of employees around. I think the difficulty really for businesses is what's the skills set that's available. So again, when you talk to manufacturers, particularly down south, Dongguan, Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Zhongshan, they're saying, hey, listen, I can find labor. That's not a problem. It's the skilled labor that's really the issue. And Stephen, to your point, this is why factories are continue to run. If they slow down or they stop, they will lose those employees because the employees won't work. They'll go do something else. So in China, there is not necessarily a demographic issue at the moment. What it really is it's a skill set issue. There are enough people, but the skill sets are not matching. And so one of the things we are seeing is, again, students are going back to school, or there are some training jobs or upskills in certain companies that they're trying to get this problem somewhat resolved. But again, overall, it's unclear what new industries are going to suck up all of that talent.
What's on the other side? What sectors are growing?
Automotive, to some degree, although the ICE it's a sunset industry. Everything is shifting to EVs. Things like you mentioned new productive forces, so anything related to tech, right? And it's not just the tech, and we think of tech of, here's a semiconductor chip, but that actually doesn't look at the whole ecosystem. The whole ecosystem is transforming. So it's not just the production, but it's also the design process, the research, the training. We're seeing universities now align with certain companies to train graduates specifically so they're engineers to go into, design or fabrication of these kinds of things.
Well, Cam, you have a unique position as well, knowing the manufacturing space in China and the eastern seaboard there. What generally is your message? And you do have an ear in Washington. What generally is your message to them as we head into a very vitriolic, if you want to call it that, election year, where you have one candidate, Donald Trump, also talking about 60% tariffs potentially all across the board. So is the noise going to kind of drown out the reality that you're seeing or not?
To some degree. I mean, when we talk to policymakers, a lot of it is, of course, as American businesses or even businesses, we want to align with what the policies are. How do we de-risk? We're not going to decouple, but we are de-risking as well. And to be fair, a lot of Chinese suppliers are also de-risking. They also want to go into Southeast Asia or Mexico or other places, partly for growth, but also partly so they can continue to expand supply chains. To your point, oftentimes what we're hearing now is China's the big dog on the block. We need to do something about it. So we're going to put in tariffs and controls. And if you don't like it, tough. And as a business, that's difficult to find out how to maneuver and move forward sometimes.
What about, just very quickly, what about the flow of American business people into China? Has that improved since we've had these 2 high-level visits this year so far? At least two.
Slightly. I mean, we are seeing more people come, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to what it was in 2019. And so this is, again, one of the challenges. You do hear from executives, I'm worried about going to China. I'm worried about what could happen. On the other side, you do also hear that from Chinese. I'm worried if I go to the U.S., what happens? And so you see this kind of not just mistrust, but also the inability to really break through some of those barriers. But we just had that J.P. Morgan conference in Shanghai. Jamie Dimon was in town. So I think, to be honest, like all things in China, it just takes a little bit of time to kind of unclog that. So we're actually pretty confident that businesses and people for business are starting to fly back more, not just for the rest of the year, but moving forward.